more around 1 o'clock because I'm supposed to check in with Nadeau Sensei at 1:30 today. So we'll go for, we're not going to end precisely at 1, but I need to kind of, you can't creep towards 1:30 because I go from one thing to the next. I just need a little time to collect myself going from one thing to another thing, you know. Anyway, I think it was last class, we kind of posed the question, how do you stand on the floating bridge of heaven during the pandemic? And what I guess I tried to sort of stress a bit was, you know, you have the tension between the opposites. Like fire, water, heaven, earth. And that tension is the cutting edge of right here, right now. And that the ability to stand there is the ability to align to that cutting edge as the center. And it takes a certain amount of something to be able to stand there. On one level, there's what we like. On the other hand, here's what we don't like. That's, you know, those are two things, and there's that edge right there. That cutting edge. And there's tension there. And so the ability to hang with that tension. How is that tension forever? I guess we have to hang there and see it. Right now we have the pandemic going on. And right now it's very easy to say there's things that we have, but there's also a lot of things because of the pandemic we don't have. And so we're right at that cutting edge. And so there's a, you know, maybe a personal center, you know, where you're kind of checking your balance, your mental state, your physical being. And there's also that cutting edge as the center. And one thing that Nadeau Sensei and I, we kind of went around on, I assume we'll probably do it again, is the term Tanren. It's a Japanese term, which used to be floated around in Japan. Obviously, it's a Japanese term. And there's a lot of ways that you can look at that term. And Tan apparently is like strengthening, toughening. And then the Ren is like polishing, refining. Tanren. And Tanren is different than just training. There is a sense where training, you know, was oftentimes termed as keiko. Go to the dojo, put your gi on and bow in and train. The Tanren was something that oftentimes was not everybody that did the keiko, the training, did the Tanren. And so, you know, you looked at who did the Tanren. Well, there was people like, you know, Ano Sensei, Tojima Sensei, and Ase Sensei. And so it was something past just the dojo training. And sometimes, you know, the expressions in Japanese are somewhat confusing. You know, the Tanren of the body. But then Seishin no Tanren, the Tanren of the spirit, character, whatever you want to call it. All right, so both a strengthening and a refining. And you can, to some degree, make yourself really tough and miss it. Conversely, you can become very knowledgeable and exist without maybe a certain sort of substance. So one story that Saotome Sensei told me once is that when he was training, he really was working on making himself really tough. And so he would like put a staff on his wrist and he had people stand on the staff, right? And then, his wrists were like really very strong. Okay. To feel himself getting stronger. Then he said one day, when he was in the midst of that, he was shaving. And he looked into the wash basin and he saw blood. And then he realized he had cut himself shaving. And because he'd made his wrist so strong, he didn't realize he cut himself. And so, he looked at me and says, Jack, I cripple myself. So the Tanren is a balancing of these two things, of refining, which can be studied. It can be developing one's character. It can be clearing oneself more spiritually. And then there's also the actual toughening, strengthening. The words are maybe not as good, but one way of looking at it, and I think O-sensei kind of alludes to it, you have iron. It has lots of impurities. And through a process you call tempering or forging or whatever it is, it becomes steel. Now that iron, you keep tempering, you keep tempering it. Iron gets finer and finer, stronger and stronger as it becomes steel. But iron is iron, steel is steel. And one thing that comes to mind is the great 49er wide receiver, Jerry Rice. And he said something I always thought was really fascinating. He said, it takes steel to sharpen steel. Because steel is steel, right? You can't sharpen it with something that it has to be something on its level. On the other hand, there's a progression of being iron where you're working towards becoming steel. But that can't sharpen steel. So the Tanren is a very interesting term. I suspect when I talked to Nado Sensei today, he'll probably go around on that again. We didn't necessarily come up with an answer to that. But the sense of things, Tan and Ren, exist side by side. So we're looking at, how we would stand on the floating bridge of heaven during the pandemic. There's all sorts of things. What I have, what I don't have. What I like, what I don't like. What I love, what I hate. And a lot of times, we go on one side or one reaction to the other side. But to say, in some sense, we're working on our own physical center, our own emotional, spiritual balance. But what if that place, the tension between the opposing forces, that was the center? And that particular place is where, let's just say, the training can potentially become Tanren. And one of the other expressions that we just went around and around on in Japan, mainly Shinru, you know. I don't know how much of this stuff was really addressed in other places, you know. Most of the other places were fun to train at because, you know, you're training in the technique and you're training to get better. You really want to become more skillful, you want to become stronger in your movement. And Shinru was always putting you there right at that cutting edge. And the term that Hikizuchi Sensei used to use was Shinken. And you know, well, in some sense, I'm going to do this, now I want to do that. There's tension. And we'll probably jump to choose this or that, depending on our inner mood or outer situation. So just in some sense to maybe research in our level, let's just research play there. What's it like? What is it like to stand in that cutting edge, that tension between the opposites? And not much dojo activity going on right now. So this can be possibly a very, very rich time. In a certain, you know, I mean, I don't think this is as much as Budo, Japanese martial arts. You know, it makes it very Japanese, but Tanren, oftentimes, you know, if you look at the physical aspect of it, is repetitive. Things like misogi, the clearing, cleansing, Japanese term, makes it fancier. And the Tanren are somewhat related. Are they the same thing? Maybe the same thing looked at from different angles. But, you know, just in terms of my own experience, studying Sarahadu-o, you learn how to hit standing on one leg, waiting for the pitch and boom. But I read his autobiography. There was a lot of interior development that he went through, going from a young hitter that was a little too eager, you know. He was so, and when he would do that, and all of a sudden the swing would break down. And the sensei said, teach him to wait. And they initially put him on one leg because he was a little too quick to go out there. And he could hit on one leg. And so finally they said, well, might as well do it in the game, which horrified him. But he found he could hit. And the rest of the book was basically understanding what it is to wait. Not be passive. And somehow, I think O-sensei looked at it and said, okay, we need to teach O-san how to stand in the tension between the opposites. Home run, strikeout. Okay? And again, I've mentioned it before, but you know, the current Warrior coach, Steve Kerr, he said the most impressive thing to him was watching, you know, this is when Mr. Durant was a member of the Warriors, and also Stephen Curry still is, what they would do after practice. The way they would, what they worked on, their attention to their craft, a dedication to expend that energy after everybody else had left. So for me, that's a form of Tanren. It's not just physical, because if you're just practicing and throwing shots up, you're going to get some exercise, but professional level, Mr. O with his hitting, or Mr. Durant or Mr. Curry with a basketball in their hand, they have a particular craft. There's the thing about the Tanren is that you are working on a craft. And Mr. O said something interesting. He just said, by necessity, it's repetitious. I mean, things like, there's a lot of other things we can do, but the Tanren, just sitting. See, all that stuff is emotion now. Some of it fun, some of it tragic. And so by placing ourselves right at that cutting edge, the tension between the opposites, that which we love, that which we absolutely do not, and being very clear about who we are there. Very easy. There's a type of interior development, or so we were told. The other term for that is called shikyo, your inner development. So seishin no tanren, the tanren of the spirit, and the shugyo. Those are Japanese words that in a lot of ways don't necessarily translate well, because we make them Japanese and go, oh, soji, all of a sudden we get into another idea. So anyway, we're going to go into the next room, and let's make that transition. And I think yesterday, or actually a couple of days ago, I had this all organized. So we're going to do a couple of things. So my apologies for not being as organized today. Okay. So let's start out with right? And for me, this is a pretty major practice. There's no dojo. We're doing the broadcast. I have to watch out and make sure I don't break a lamp or anything. And what I try to mention, as far as I can tell, if you're a tea master, there's a craftsmanship to it, isn't there? If you're Stephen Curry, there's craftsmanship to your shot and your ability to handle the ball. If you're Mr. O, there's craftsmanship in the way you hold and then the ability to boom. Okay. So we're going to go over the points. We've done this before. But again, what is interesting, fascinating to me is that, when you're doing the Tanren, you're going through repetition. But if all you do is repeat, you may physically get tougher, but you don't refine. And conversely, if everything is refinement out there, there's nothing interior-wise to support the knowledge or awareness of it. So, craftsmanship, proper grip. See, I kind of like the V here between your index finger and thumb, right in the middle, and up about a fist length. The sword starts right about here, so you don't want to be gripping, even though this is not sharp, it's just kind of sloppy. And just this grip. Now, for example, right here, when I change hands, you notice how there's a little bit of motion, As I get better, there's less motion. So every time I change my hands, there's a, I want to, as I'm changing the hands, there's still motion. But I notice there's a steadiness. In fact, when I'm holding this way, major hand is your left. I'm holding from the right hand, holding from the left hand. And even though, if this is wood, not steel, how do I want that sword to feel? I want that sword to feel like that. I'm holding me. I'm holding a weapon out there. Okay, so those are preliminary checks. And we've covered this before, but just in terms of your laying a foundation. Okay. Now here, you notice how I'm raising with my right hand. I'm right hand dominant. But the left hand starts to raise, doesn't it? Okay. And as much as it's the hand, proper triangle point base, not too long, not too short, about a fist length. Balls of the feet. It's almost like what I am. I'm on a raft. And there's a gentle rocking motion right here. So when that goes here, that's when. So I'm really feeling that. Ankles, knees, hips. Okay. Now right about here, I'm going to hit myself. So again, the right hand engages. Full form cut. I could just swing from here, but I try to put that sword in my spine. I can't be too tight in the shoulders and do that. So I've got to, but the hands stay connected. I don't let the hands go limp. There's still a grip, a light grip, but firm. Okay? Then the arms extend out. Now watch here how I'm swinging with my right hand. When I do that, there's a loop here. Left hand. That. initially you're working on just the hands, but it's a full body through that, on that float. There's a gentle rocking motion. You're riding that up. Not the right hand, the left hand. Arms out. And you'll notice the difference between leading with the right hand and the left hand being the power hand. Okay? Okay, so those are what I call just, you're kind of refining your craft. Okay? Anybody with a question so far? This is your basic sword cut, but there's a lot there. And it can be a form of Tanren. Okay? Anybody so far? Everybody with me on that? Anything you'd like to kind of go over? That's kind of the refinement. Okay? It's a refinement. Yes.
No, that's very useful,
Yeah.
Sensei.
Yeah.
The only question I have is one I've kind of always had with Boken,
Okay.
which is I think my hands are larger than your average samurai.
Yeah.
Because when I grip the hilt of the, I've got a Boken where it's got a kind of line between the pretend blade and the hilt.
Yeah.
You know, in the wood, it does not one smooth thing. And if I grip with two hands and allow for like an imaginary third hand in between them, then it's too big for the length of the handle.
Yeah.
So
you adapt. You adapt.
So lately, I've just been putting my hands a little bit closer than a fist width, because otherwise I'm either on the blade or off the end of the hilt.
You adapt. Okay, there's a beautiful picture of Mr. O, and he's cutting some bamboo, right? And guess what? He's holding his sword not this way, but this way. And you know, it shows him boom, cutting that way. And that's absolutely not the way you would cut. He's got his hands together like he was holding a baseball bat. So boom, boom. And you know, and his caption on the photo was, "Do you see a power hitter here?" He was trained, you know, obviously he learned to cut the way you're supposed to cut with the grip you're supposed to, but he adapted it to baseball. Now your hands are, I wish I had bigger hands. I would have been a better basketball player. Okay.
Yeah, they're good for piano.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, you know, you make do with, you know, you're 7 foot tall. You know, it can help you in certain things in basketball and probably hurt you for other things. Okay, so you know, you basically find your own truth with it. So if you got to hold a little closer, I don't think there's anything bad in it. Okay. For a Japanese body, it's used in Japanese sword, Japanese art. They say, you know, like a hands or fist length between the hands. In your case, it doesn't apply. And if you try to make it apply, you're going to go nuts. Okay?
Thank you. I've been going nuts.
Yeah, well, that's that, you know. Yeah, it's called guilt. Oh my God, I'm holding different than the classical way. It's like, yeah, the classical way was built for Japanese bodies centuries ago. Okay? Anything else? You know, you covered so far the grip, the actual. It's important. You know, let me make sure I'm doing full body, which I get away with if I'm just, you know, looking at everybody in the class. Okay. Now standing here, it's like the ocean's still. It's not set. And if I'm holding here a lot, I find my right hand tightening, which I don't want. Because my right hand tightens, it'll lead. But sit, you know, just standing on that raft, it's a very still ocean. But the ocean is still, but it's not set. That's kind of, you know, to some degree, you know, the and to do that, my mind has to clear. And you know, this gets busy. That's part of what you call the fact that we're not covering a lot of things. But as Mr. O said, the practice of it is repetitive. Okay? You repeat, and you repeat, and you repeat, and you repeat. Sometimes he would, after a game, go to his coach's house and they would work. Okay? Mr. Durant, Mr. Curry, after practice. Sometimes maybe after a game, if they said, you know, I need a little bit to refine that. Okay, we're not a sport. But for me, that's Tanren. The game is more like the Keiko. That's good. That's what everybody pays attention to. But the Tanren is different. Now, this is what you would call a form cut, and there's probably a variety of different forms, okay? One thing that Curry said, he says that all great shooters have one thing in common: absolute control over their basics. And he didn't say all great shooters have the same basics. You can be a great shooter, but you have to sort of understand your own basics. All right? Now, so remember on this one is the tendency. Notice the tendency to let the right hand lead. That's Mr. O swing breaking down. No sensei said, okay, teach him to wait. And maybe not initially, but you start to feel the ocean begin to swell. And then there's a wave, boom. Now the last part, there's a closing motion, which is different than squeezing and stopping the cut, or leaning out and putting your weight in the cut. So there's that motion, there's that motion, and there's that motion. This is the form cut. Notice how that closing motion is not just hands. How does the wave feel when it's crashing? And the squeeze is not like that. The squeeze is, for me, I visualize a tube of toothpaste. I can squeeze it, get stronger, but I'm going to take the cap off and put the toothpaste on my toothbrush. The whole body is in that compression. Basic physics. You've got a pipe this wide, this big, with a kind of a thing to connect them to a much narrower pipe. The water, when it goes here, speeds up. The water doesn't break down. It speeds up. So that's the pipe and that's the narrow pipe. the flow goes out. That's the form cut. Anybody with a question on that form cut, including the closing motion?
The closing kids, the closing motion part.
Yeah.
How much, how much tension and looseness should there be ideally in that? Is it a different ratio than the first two parts, or like a
Yes.
tenth at the end? So
Yes.
okay.
The first two are even, raising, extending. But if you don't get the closing motion right, the first two are useless. Getting that closing motion right is a journey. Yeah, positioning for a nikyo. Applying the nikyo. You don't tense there, but there's that closure. Okay? That's a journey. The journey is part of the Tanren, and it's infinite. Mr. O kept on standing on one leg and hitting and hitting and hitting and standing on one leg and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then he came to the realization that what O-sensei had told him to wait was the most active thing he did. He had absolute focus. One time he was posing for a camera this way, and an 8-year-old kid jumped on top of his arm like he was a bar, and he didn't budge. His concentration was that good, almost supernatural. John Miller, lead announcer for the Giants, one time I'm listening to him, he says that O studied the Japanese art of Aikido. I said, wow, John Miller, Giants broadcast, he said that, O on one leg could be pushed on by several guys that couldn't budge him. So since they could hold a stick out, and people push it from the side, maybe 2 or 3 guys couldn't budge it. And so Mr. O was he exactly, are any of us liable to get that? I don't know. But that sort of focus, see, right here, we're going to get into the actual closing motion more when we do the complete cut. That's just a basic cut. Mr. Curry says, feet, hands, position, eye looking at the hoop. And he says, I hold the ball here. You don't have to. Although I hold it that way too. Right? So anyway, those are basics. Okay? Now we're gonna, I think some of this will be somewhat answered when we go through the full cut. The full cut is not necessarily the basics, but you have to have the basics to get into the full cut. Anybody else with a question or anything you'd like cleared up? Okay.
Could we see that in profile?
Yeah. Yeah, let me put myself on full screen and make sure I don't, I'm swinging my first couple, my attention's too far out there. But what I really want to be able to do and the end part is, Mr. Hikizuchi used to raise his back heel. Okay, Tojiba Sensei would add that little bit. So the closure is not just your hands. Okay. Does that help? Yes,
Yeah,
no?
thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Okay, yeah, I'm doing a kind of an angular thing here because if I'm looking this way, you don't quite see the dynamics of it. But yeah, I can do a full profile if you need. Okay, now we're going to get to putting everything together. The raise, the cutting motion, then the closing motion. Of those three, if you miss the closing motion, the whole thing goes down. You get exercise. Okay? So, make sure I don't break anything. Okay, let's check in there a little bit. So that's taking the basics and moving into what you call kind of application. Anybody with a question or comment there?
The comment I have is that I'm feeling a little more flow swinging now than at the beginning of class. So that's nice.
Well, the basics themselves, I mean, you know, you in sports, they might call it a warm-up, all right? If you're a pitcher and, you know, I give you the ball, say strike this guy out and win the game and you haven't warmed up, you're gonna blow your arm out. So, you know, it may take a couple of swings or whatever. Boom. Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's this. Okay, so ideally, what you want is you want those basics, the basic cut, to have something you're saying you're feeling more flow at that. Okay. All right. So yeah, flow. Anybody else? Okay. So making sure I don't break anything. Let's. Yeah. All of that, and there's that closing motion. Oops. Anybody question? Comment? Well, I thought we'd do, just to get a better feeling of the closing motion. And we've done this before. Now here, the way Tojima Sensei, most people kind of go this way, but opening the hands, even here, boom, there's that feeling through the body. Boom. And extending out, boom, boom, boom. Open, close, draw, close, open. Again, Misogi and Tanren are oftentimes they're repetitive. Okay. And sometimes, we see that as a outward Aikido exercise. Okay, the rowing motions, right? Right. But one of the things about it, for example, there's that sense right there where that wave, remember we were talking about the wave, you're standing on that float. That becomes a vibration. I've done this maybe once or twice in my whole life, but if you go underneath a waterfall, there's that point when you go under there, boom, your tissues contract. But on the other hand, the sense is that, there's an expansion after that, in terms of spirit, but it's not, you don't want to go this way. Boom. So right here, ooh, and that's very much the same feeling as, or that closing motion. Okay? Anybody with a question, comment on just that? This is very basic. Again, Tanren. Tanren is repetitive. All right. How many shots does Curry put up? How many swings does O take after a game? Does not say we're supposed to do that. Both of them are professionals at that level, but Tojima Sensei wasn't a professional Aikido teacher. He and Ano Sensei, they both worked in a factory when I first met them. Ano Sensei had a school, but he didn't teach there every day. And it was in a different town. So anybody with Anybody find that that motion made this closing motion a little easier? Anybody? Okay. Yeah, go on.
I mean, I could see the connection actually, because
Yeah.
like I could feel when I'm doing the rowing, it, you know, that closing motion is the whole body
Yeah.
in a similar way to the sword cut closing
Yeah.
motion. So I could see that. I've been doing, you know, like I said, I've been doing the rowing motion like on alternate days for part of my exercise program for about 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
so I'm getting slightly less bad at that. So yeah, I like it. I like that connection there.
Well, the thing in sports, they just say the follow through. You see
There
what I mean?
was
Supporting motion, but you know, this is more like boom, there's the follow through. Going back and forth, but boom, 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 boom. If you're going to go back, there's a follow through. If you go forward, boom, there's a follow through. Boom, boom, boom. So that part of it, if you miss the follow through, you can be waving your arms, getting a lot of exercise, or conversely, you know, Tai Chi, for example, if we were to do Tai Chi wise, it would have the same, you know, you wouldn't be doing Tai Chi in a drifting way. What would you get off of this? The beat. But right here, boom, within this motion, there's that motion. All right? And within that motion, boom, there's this motion. Boom. Okay? Okay, so we're going to go on. And again, this is a very, very basic presentation. The cut that Tojima Sensei really liked was from third eye, just below the waist, and then the closing down there. Raise shallow. This is very high raise, about as high as you can get. The only way it could be, you do a backflip, okay, which I'm not going to try, okay? All right, but you raise to here. Again, right hand leading. See, when I go this way, the right hand, there's a loop. It loops. Now here, and the closing motion down there is the same. Okay. All right. Anybody with a question on that? I call it the deeper cut. The deeper cut. If I work on any one thing, I work on that cut. Okay, but I also do this one because, you know, if you just do this all the time, you just get tenser and heavier. You get stronger, you get exercise, but boom. Okay? Anybody with a question on that one before we kind of go to the cut itself? That's kind of the basics of that cut. Okay? Same thing.
is the ending tension the same? I mean, because you're cutting to a lower angle, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So is the closing tension the same, or is it more intense because it's a lower angle, or is it roughly equivalent with vis-a-vis the other cut?
I would say it's the same. Okay, but the extended cut, even though you're closing, there's more of an expansive feel. Okay, and the lower cut, it's not that you're contracting, but you know, like, Because yeah, there's a sense it's lower, okay? But the actual movement itself, the closing motion doesn't alter, okay? It doesn't change. Your perception of it may, but from my experience, the two closing movements are exactly the same. But my perception, however, shifts when I do the deeper cut. Okay? Okay. Anyway, let's
Thank
go
you.
back. Okay. Yeah. So start. I warm up. Boom. Boom. Okay. Okay. Anyway, any thing on that? And you work on the form cut. How that closing motion feels. Cliff's question was really good because my perception is if you do the more expansive cut and more that motion, the closing motion is exactly the same, but our perception of it changes. Okay. I see that one as more of a, there's a closure to it, is expansive. I see this one as boom, it kind of is energy kind of coming into the core, the root. Okay. And you need both. If you just do the last one, then the tendency is to get kind of too closed. All right. And if you just do the first one, the tendency is to kind of go further out. So I vary. I do one until I switch to the other and I switch back. You don't have to do the same cut 3,000 times. And these days I do not do 3,000 cuts. I did that for a while, and that was, it puts you in an altered state, let me tell you. Okay, and which is neither good nor bad, okay? But anyway, anybody with a question on that cut? Okay, just a brief. For the first cut, we did kind of what they call the rowing motion. This one is more like that. Now, initially, so I'm shaking my hands, right? I keep doing this, I'm going to get tired, right? Right, but when I move the hands, my belly is moving, okay? But what you kind of want to do, there's a reversal. Or all of a sudden, there's a vibration in your belly and your hands start to move off of that. Okay. So that feeling right there of the core awakening. There's an obvious raise, an obvious cut, and an obvious closure. Well, Sensei told Mr. O to wait. That's the obvious form, but there's also a core vibrating. And the hands, I can get that out there. The hands stay on focus. Okay. This is a little bit like in football, okay? I dive into the end zone and I drop the football. Okay, here's a little bit more like boom, touchdown. It has nothing to do with sports, but it's almost like what happens is your system lights up. So, quicker I put that core in, the more I'm free from my upper body. Okay? Okay, this is Mr. O hitting a single. This is Mr. O hitting a double. This is Mr. O bouncing one off the wall. And there's like, boom, there's that area right there. He knows that's a home run. Boom, boom. And this is Mr. Curry pulling up from 40 feet and boom, drilling it at the buzzer to win the game. And those are sports. The spirit awakening. Not just as an idea, but sort of as a through the body experience is really what Tanren is about. Anyway, we are going to go back. So, I guess we have a, the one thing that I'm trying to share, okay, is, that particular thing with the sword. You can do as exercise, or you can do for a variety of reasons. But that expression came up that Nado Sensei and I bounced around called Tanren. Sometimes it's actually called forging. Okay, it's translated that way. But the Tanren is more than just getting a workout. Okay. So you're refining, you're learning, your awareness, knowledge is increasing. But at the same time, that feeling of that the body motion awakens something much more than just the awareness of it. It awakens kind of the sense of the spirit. And so as I kind of do that, for example, Tojima Sensei used to swing and then he would sit. And, for me, that's a very interesting experience because that swinging takes you a place. So those are things. Tojima Sensei, the last, I saw him later a couple more times, but he was here in 1979. And, he took Linda Holiday Sensei, myself, and a couple of other people. And, he said, you should sit. Everybody should sit. And he was not, it was like the same thing. It's like, okay, I'm not going to tell you what, because it's about investigating your own. I would just say, our journey from body to spirit. And the Tanren is a vehicle. If you're an Aikido, maybe you pick up a bokken. If you're a musician, you, whatever, you don't have to do this. Okay? If you're a basketball player, okay, you got a ball, you got a hoop. All right? So, everybody has a kind of path, a lineage. Okay? If you're a theoretical physicist, okay, you've got your desk, you've got your chalkboard, you've got your algorithms, da. Okay, so it's the Tanren is a little bit about, okay, as much as it's Aikido can be very general. That area right there when there's called focus and you specialize a little bit, and I that sort of thing is very individual. If you like doing it, you do it. If you don't, there are other ways and other approaches to the art. So it's not the only thing. It's just that came up when the docents and I had our last conference. I've got to call them in about 23 minutes. So anyway, before we break, anybody with a question or observation on that? Because what I'm trying to do is lay out. This is again my own particular interpretation of things, but just in terms of the basic form of the cut, especially the order of the hands, not this leading, and really this doesn't lead. There's that sense of the ocean swelling, and then boom, there's that wave crashing, boom. And here, that's that wave in motion, but when it hits the shore or the cliff, boom, there's that. And then it reflects back, doesn't it? Gathers itself again. Wow. So again, you find in nature a reinforcement. Honor Sensei, for example, he just liked the rhythms of nature. And Tojiba Sensei, I'm sure he did also. Okay, but he had the whole thing, as far as I could tell, somewhat as much as you could, sort of diagrammed out. All right, so they were quite a combination because Honor Sensei was open, feel, and Tojiba Sensei was kind of that. Put it in your body to get the spirit place. Okay? So anybody with a question or whatever? I mean, that gives you a little bit if you want to kind of investigate it. Okay, it gives you some tools, between the, I mean, just a repetitive movement. I remember when I first got to Japan, and I was staying with Mary Heine Sensei before I went, she took me and this other guy down to Shingu after, about a week. I spent about a week in Tokyo. And she just said something like, you don't realize how important, just that repetitive movement of raising and cutting with the sword is, And I remember, Stan Pranin, who did Aiki News and Aikido Journal. And he trained there for about a month. And he came up to me and said, I'm starting to get how important just that basic movement of raising and cutting is. Because there's so much other stuff. There's a wide variety of different movements. But somehow, the repetitive of that basic cut is actually quite, what are you going to do? I mean, if you're a basketball player, you got a hoop, you got a ball. Well, that's the game, isn't it? Now, in Aikido, you're not aiming for the hoop. You're training the body. There's also the mental sense. There's a refinement to it. Your understanding of a basic, simple movement continues to deepen. But you're not aiming at a hoop. You're aiming at something you might call spirit. And if you keep changing the height of, go to the Y, which I haven't been to in a long time, they have kind of a junior division there. And so they lower the hoop to it's about 8 feet tall. Well, when I was younger, I could probably go up there and dunk. I wouldn't even try it. It's too embarrassing these days. But, I said, oh, good, boom, But, you shoot at an 8-foot hoop, your muscle memory is off, right? Or you take a medicine ball and you start shooting with that. Yeah, your arms are gonna get stronger, but you're gonna go clank, 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 right? And sometimes things are descriptive in a certain way that you sort of have to pay attention. Like I was watching the Curry instructional video. And he was talking about how to shoot a floater, which means you're dribbling, you don't pull up and shoot, or you don't take it to the rim and do a layup. It's just that you go like that. I always had trouble with that shot. Okay? And so what he said, this is again somebody who really has researched this. Maybe somebody explained it to him. But he says your arm and your leg go up together. In Tai Chi, that's a move that we haven't covered in the 30 movements. It's called Golden Cough stands on one leg. But I'll tell you, I was going, oh yeah, because a floater gets up quick past the shot blocker, and it goes to the rim, and it just usually kind of bounces around, and it just goes right through ideally. And if you shoot it like that, it hits the rim, or it gets blocked because, see, as the arm and the leg are going up together, the ball gets a higher arc. The higher the arc, the softer the shot, goes down, maybe hits a couple times, settles through the net. But something like that's a tip, so to speak, a nugget. In other words, the universe sends us those. They're called insights, right? And as you're doing the Tanren, part of the refinement is those nuggets start to show themselves. On the other hand, if you get, oh yeah, I got this, I got all these nuggets out there. Now the nuggets show meaningfully when they're balanced by the time, not the toughening, the strengthening. It's tough, and strengthen your ability to stand at that cutting edge between this and that. Okay? And so that part of it is very, I don't know, to me it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, this morning I just took the sword when I woke up and I just swung it a couple times, and all of a sudden I'm in a pretty good place. Doesn't mean the coronavirus pandemic isn't going on or anything like that, but my breath is deep. My body has a nice feel sense of itself. My mind, instead of going around and around what the newsfeed is going on, is kind of a little clearer, more. I'm able to discriminate and focus on what I need to, as opposed to like getting caught up in this noise. So, what I find, is the Tanren allows me to, hey, the bad stuff is still going on. And there's a lot of great stuff like vaccines coming up. And there's all this tension, like, who's going to get the vaccine? How long will it take us? And just be able to stand there, right in that tension between the opposites, fire, water, heaven, earth. Right? The human side of us, the coming side of us. Boom. That's that to me is how you would stand on the floating bridge of heaven during the pandemic. Okay, and that sword cut, boom. I find that puts me in a good place. Okay, I mean, my mind sharpens because, you know, the attention to the detail is something that you keep. You know, I don't need that anymore. Bo thought that. You know, his coach leaves to be a manager on another team. He's got it figured out. He starts hitting off the two legs. He stinks. His coach gets fired because he's not maybe as good a manager as he was a coach. So O goes up and says, please, get me going again. You know, because all of a sudden I got this. I don't have to do this one-legged stuff at weight anymore. Guess what? Now, your basics, and again what Curry said, all great shooters have complete command of their basics. They don't have the same basics. They have command of their basics. Okay? And so there's a certain sort of Tanren there. There's a certain sort of knowledge and training to understand your basics. But then you don't lose those basics. Those basics, as you go deeper, finer, finer, deeper, they deepen and they get finer. And what happens is the level of us that's standing at that cutting edge center is a deeper or finer version of ourselves. And through that deeper, finer version of ourselves, something called spirit starts to emerge. Okay? Somebody asked me in sporting terms what that changes. Well, you go from, you know, Aikido is a martial art. It's about being a warrior, not a basketball player. That's my favorite team anyway. But you go from being a warrior to a champion. That's a bit of alchemy. And as we polish ourselves, which is the Tanren. And so today we covered a couple of outward misogi movements. We covered 2 cuts, all right? And, you know, I'm probably somewhat autistic because I can be endlessly fascinated by those moves again and again and again. You know, if I'm in a bad mood or a bad place, I'll pick up the sword and, you know, there's a process that starts. And after I swing, whatever it is usually gone. And, you know, the circumstances have to change. But what has changed is me. And since they said it, you know, all these impurities, we're an eye encased in this matter dimension, and we're actually organic matter, very complex. And so, you know, the actual Tanren cleanses the senses. There's certain things that we make way more important than we are. And, you know, that pollutes the senses. And so when the senses are polluted, we're in this heavy realm, thinking way too fast and being controlled by our I-mind thoughts. Or Bruce Lee called the noisy mind. And a couple of good sword cuts, you know, once you start to work on it, gets me at least into a totally different place with myself. You know, it's almost like not so much something I want to do, but it's almost like something that I have to do. Okay? And, you know, if you were to ask, you know, Mr. O, why do you do that? You just played a game. Why are you at your coach's house swinging the bat some more? He just had this real desire. He says, you know, there's an overriding desire in me for skill. Not a claim. But you know, this crazy one-legged hitting, what Osensei told me is the weight. And the skill was something that was a product of that. It was a product of his Tanren, not his playing in games. Yes, you know, he was 868 lifetime home runs. He should be in the American Hall of Fame, but they don't put him in it. But he's maybe the greatest hitter of all time, you know, sensei of baseball, without chemicals. Just maybe some sake, right, and green tea. So you know, but you know, he worked on what those sensei said. So he understood the Tanren. Now, we're not going to hit 868 home runs or anything, but maybe, you know, the pandemic gives us a chance to start to kind of, you know, we're all iron, all right? But we can start to move towards being steel, not in a cold or destructive way, okay? And that's, again, the forging right in that tension between the opposites. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna prep for Nado Sensei for about 10 minutes. So thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay, take care. David, do you want